My mother loved me, as long as I was a reflection she recognized in the mirror. The moment my own image began to emerge, sharp and distinct from hers, her love became conditional. And on the night of my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, the conditions became an ultimatum. The house was a stage, every flower arrangement and polished piece of silver a part of the perfect production my mother, Catherine, had orchestrated. Guests in muted, expensive colors mingled, their laughter a low hum beneath the string quartet playing softly in the corner. This night was the pinnacle of her life's work, projecting an image of flawless, traditional elegance. I had tried to comply. I wore the dark blue silk dress she had approved, a demure and respectable choice. But over it, I wore my favorite vintage leather jacket. It was soft and worn, with a history in its seams, and it felt more like my own skin than anything else I owned. It was my armor. It was me. I came down the stairs, feeling the familiar mix of excitement for a party and the dread of my mother's inevitable inspection. I saw my sister, Isabel, first. She was a perfect doll in pale pink chiffon and the pearls our mother had laid out for her. She gave me a nervous look, her eyes flicking to my jacket. Then my mother turned from a conversation with a guest and saw me. The polite, hostess smile didn't just fade, it was wiped clean from her face, leaving behind a mask of cold, hard fury. Without a word, she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin, and pulled me into my father's empty study. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. Her eyes were not on my face, but locked on the jacket, as if it were a physical stain on her pristine reputation. "You will not embarrass me tonight, Eva. Not tonight." "Mom, it's just a jacket," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The dress is what you wanted. This is just me." "I don't care," she shot back, her voice shaking with rage. "This is not about you. This is about our family. This is about respect. You will take that hideous thing off, and you will put on the pearls I left for you on your dresser." It was never about the clothes. It was about control. The pearls were her uniform, and by refusing them, I was refusing to be one of her soldiers. The jacket was my flag of independence, and she was demanding I burn it. "No," I said, the word small but solid. "I'm not going to do that." Her face, already a mask of fury, seemed to crumble and then reset into something terrifyingly calm. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, a piece of faulty equipment that needed to be discarded. "Fine," she said, her voice chillingly quiet. "You have a choice. You can take off that jacket, walk out there, and be a member of this family. Or you can keep it on." She took a step back, her eyes like chips of ice. "But if you walk out of this room wearing that jacket, you are choosing it over us. You will walk out of this house tonight and you will no longer be my daughter. The choice is yours." I stood there, the soft leather of the jacket feeling like the only real thing in the room. The string quartet began a new song in the other room, a cheerful melody that sounded like it was coming from a different planet. My mother had just handed me an ultimatum. She had put a price on her love, on my very identity as her child. And the price was a pearl necklace and a lie. My mother's obsession with appearances was the religion of our household. Our home wasn't a place to live, it was a stage. Our lives were not our own, they were a carefully crafted performance for an unseen, ever-present audience of neighbors, friends, and distant relatives. From our earliest years, my sister Isabel and I were not children, but props. Our Christmas cards were professionally photographed in August, forcing us into itchy wool sweaters in the summer heat to get the perfect shot. Our birthday parties had themes and color schemes that were more important than the games we played. We were taught that what people thought of us was more important than who we actually were. A wrinkle in a dress was a moral failing. A scuff on a shoe was a sign of disrespect to the family name. We were walking, talking advertisements for my mother's impeccable taste and control. Isabel took to this role with ease. She was born for it. She genuinely loved the frilly dresses, the perfectly coiffed hair, the compliments she received for being such a little lady. She learned early that conformity was the currency of our mother's affection, and she became very, very rich in it. I was always the problem child, the one who chafed under the strictures of the family brand. I was the one who felt more at home in worn-out jeans than in starched dresses. I didn't want to be looked at, I wanted to be climbing a tree or reading a book, activities that often left my pristine outfits less than pristine. My mother saw my individuality not as a personality trait, but as a deliberate act of sabotage. She couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to be perfect, why I wouldn't want to be beautiful in the way she defined it. My quiet rebellion was a constant source of frustration for her. She had a favorite phrase, one she would repeat like a mantra anytime I questioned her rules. "You are not just representing yourself, Eva. You are representing this family." The subtext was always clear, and you are doing a terrible job of it. My mother didn't raise daughters, she curated a brand. And I was the product that always threatened to go off script, to tarnish the carefully constructed image she had spent her life building. This conflict came to a head many times, but never more so than my senior prom. She had picked out a pale lilac ballgown for me, a dress fit for a princess in a fairy tale. I had saved up my own money and bought a vintage, 1940s-style emerald green dress. It was unique, elegant, and it felt like me. The fight we had over that dress was legendary. She called my choice costumey and desperate for attention. I saw her choice as an attempt to erase me. I wore the green dress in the end, but the victory was hollow. She barely spoke to me for weeks. The leather jacket, the source of our final battle, was my declaration of independence. I found it in a thrift store when I was 19. It was old and imperfect, but it fit me like it had been made for me. It was a shield against my mother's world of pastel conformity. When I wore it, I felt strong. I felt like myself. It represented a world outside her perfectly manicured lawn, a world of art, music, grit, and authenticity. Everything she wasn't. She hated it on sight. To her, it was a symbol of everything she had failed to stamp out in me. It was cheap, it was defiant, it was everything she prayed I wouldn't become. So, on the night of her anniversary, when I walked down those stairs, it wasn't just a jacket she saw. It was a summary of all my transgressions, a final, public refusal to be the daughter she had designed. It was never about the leather. It was about my stubborn insistence on being my own person. And for my mother, that was the one crime she could never, ever forgive. The planning for the anniversary party was a storm of red flags, each one a signal of the hurricane to come. My mother approached the event not as a celebration of love, but as a campaign for social dominance. Every detail was a battle to be won, every choice a reflection of her status. Weeks before the party, the first official directive arrived. It was an email to me, my sister, and my father, with the subject line, "Party attire, important." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree. She had outlined a specific color palette for the immediate family, shades of champagne, blush, and cream. "It is imperative that we present a unified and elegant front for the photographer," she wrote. "Please have your outfits approved by me no later than the 15th. This wasn't a family party, it was a photo shoot for which we were the unpaid, strictly managed models. I knew this was a preemptive strike against me. I found a beautiful, tasteful silk dress in a deep navy blue. It was elegant, formal, and utterly appropriate. I sent a photo of it to my mother, hoping its undeniable classiness would override her color command. Her reply came back almost instantly. "Eva, that's a lovely dress, but it is not on the palette. It will look jarring in the family portraits. Please find something in cream. There is still time." She was already rejecting my choices, trying to force me into her pre-approved mold before the night even began. The following weekend, the second red flag went up. My mother took Isabel on a lavish shopping trip to a high-end boutique. She posted a photo on her social media of them clinking champagne glasses, a dozen blush-toned dresses in the background. The caption read, "A perfect day finding the perfect dress for my perfect girl. So blessed." #MotherDaughter. The post was a public declaration of favoritism. Isabel was the perfect girl because she was compliant. I, by extension, was the imperfect one, the one who wasn't worth a special shopping trip, the one who couldn't be trusted to choose her own clothes. I saw my father that evening, and he patted me on the shoulder. "Did you see the picture of your sister? She's going to look like an angel," he said, beaming. "Make sure you find something that coordinates, honey." Even he was enlisted as a soldier in her army of conformity. The red flags were no longer just warnings, they were becoming a suffocating reality. My mother was tightening her grip, trying to micromanage every aspect of my appearance to ensure I didn't step 1 inch out of her carefully drawn lines. The day of the party, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Before any guests arrived, my mother assembled the 4 of us in the living room for a final inspection. Her eyes scanned each of us like a drill sergeant. She adjusted my father's tie. She fluffed a curl on Isabel's head. Then she turned to me. I was wearing the blue dress. I had not yet put on the jacket. "Now, Eva," she said, her voice low and tight. "You know how much tonight means to me. To us." She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on my shoulder, her touch feeling more like a warning than an act of affection. "Please. Let's not have any surprises. Let's just have one beautiful, perfect evening." It was a threat disguised as a plea. She was telling me that she knew I was capable of rebellion, and that tonight of all nights, it would not be tolerated. The battle lines were drawn. The evening hadn't even started, and I was already exhausted from fighting a war of attrition against her expectations. She wasn't just planning a party, she was demanding my unconditional surrender. I stood in the quiet study, the muffled sounds of the party outside feeling like they were from another universe. My mother's ultimatum hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. The choice she had given me wasn't about a jacket versus a pearl necklace. It was about my identity versus her approval. It was a choice I had been forced to make my entire life, but never so explicitly. I looked at her face, searching for a flicker of the mother who had once read me bedtime stories, but she was gone. In her place was a stranger, a cold strategist whose only goal was to protect her brand. My love for her was not as important as her image. My hand tightened on the soft, worn leather of my jacket. Taking it off would have been easy. It would have meant a quiet, peaceful evening. It would have meant praise from my father, a relieved smile from my sister, and my mother's temporary, conditional approval. It would have meant surrender. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't do it. I was tired of surrendering little pieces of myself to keep the peace. No, I said again, my voice quiet but firm. This is who I am. I'm not going to hide myself for your guests. The last bit of warmth drained from her eyes, leaving them flat and empty, like a house with no one home. Very well, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. The lack of anger was somehow more terrifying than her previous rage. It was the sound of a final judgment being passed. You have made your choice, she continued, her tone clinical. And so I am making mine. You are no longer welcome in this house. You are no longer my daughter. The words were so simple, so clean, yet they were the most violent things I had ever heard. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't a heated argument that had gone too far. It was a calm, deliberate, and strategic amputation of a daughter she had deemed defective. She was cutting me out of the family portrait to ensure the picture remained perfect. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply turned and opened the door to the study. I will walk you out, she said, as if I were a misbehaving guest and not the child she had raised. The humiliation was in her cold, efficient disposal of me. As we walked towards a side door, we passed the main hallway. My father saw us. He looked at my jacket, then at my mother's stony face. He understood immediately and a look of deep, weary disappointment crossed his face. Your mother asked for one thing, Eva, he said, shaking his head. He had sided with her, as he always did. My sister Isabel was there too, her eyes wide. She looked at me, then at our mother, her expression a mixture of fear and pity. But she said nothing. She just watched me go, her silence a quiet endorsement of the verdict. My entire family stood as silent witnesses to my execution. My mother opened the side door to the cool night air. The sounds of the party, the music, the laughter, rushed out, a painful reminder of the world I was being exiled from. Goodbye, Eva, she said, her voice as formal as if she were speaking to a stranger. Then she closed the door, and the lock clicked shut. I stood alone on the manicured lawn, the party a warm, glowing bubble of light behind me. I was on the outside, looking in, for the last time. I clutched my leather jacket, the symbol of my supposed crime. It was the only thing that felt real. I had chosen it, and in doing so, I had chosen myself. But the cost was everything I had ever known. I had been disowned. Not for a scandal, not for a terrible crime, but for a dress code violation. The triviality of it was the most humiliating part of all. My worth as a daughter was less than the price of a pearl necklace. I walked away from that house, not knowing where I was going. Each step on the cold pavement felt like a step into a new, terrifying world where I was completely untethered. The cheerful music from the party faded behind me, replaced by the sound of my own unsteady breathing. I ended up at a small, deserted park a few miles away, sinking onto a cold metal bench under a flickering street lamp. And that's where the collapse happened. It wasn't a loud scream. It was a silent, violent implosion of everything I thought was true. My family, my home, my past, all of it had been revoked in a single, chilling sentence. The tears finally came, hot and bitter. I wasn't just crying for the loss of my family, I was crying for the little girl who had spent her whole life trying to earn a love that was never really on offer. I was mourning the death of a hope I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to. For the next few days, I was a ghost. I stayed on a friend's sofa, staring at the ceiling, my phone a dead weight in my hand. I tried calling my mother once. It went straight to voicemail. Her phone wasn't off, she was actively rejecting my calls. I texted my father, a desperate plea for reason. His reply was a short, brutal text. You owe your mother an apology, Eva. You embarrassed this entire family with your selfish display. He didn't see a daughter in pain, he saw a PR problem that needed to be managed. My sister, Isabel, sent me a long, tearful message filled with apologies that did nothing but twist the knife. I'm so sorry this happened, she wrote. But why couldn't you just take the jacket off for one night? It would have made everything so much easier. Easier for them. That was the point. My self-erasure was the price of their comfort. Her text was the final confirmation that no one was coming to save me. No one even understood what I needed to be saved from. They didn't see my choice as an act of self-preservation. They saw it as a hostile act against the family. They would never understand my side, because they were incapable of seeing a world where their needs weren't the center of the universe. And that's when a new, colder realization settled over me. There was nothing to go back to. The family I wanted, the one that might love me for who I was, didn't exist. It never had. I had been trying to get a seat at a table that was rotten from the inside out. Forgiveness is just letting go of the hope that they'll ever understand. That thought became my new North Star. I couldn't fix them. I couldn't make them see me. But I could stop waiting for them to. I could let go. The collapse ended there, on that lumpy sofa in a friend's apartment. It was a quiet death, the death of the hopeful daughter. And from her ashes, someone else had to be born. Someone who could survive alone. So I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I packed a single bag, my leather jacket draped over it, and I moved to a city where no one knew my name. I took on odd jobs, waitressing, bartending, anything to pay the rent for a tiny room. I was alone, and I was terrified. But for the first time in my life, I was free. I poured all the pain, the rage, and the fierce independence into my art, my work, my new life. The next decade of my life began not with a bang, but with a quiet, resolute closing of a door. I was disowned, but in a way, I had finally been given the one thing I always wanted, permission to be myself, no matter the cost. The decade that followed was a blur of grit and creation. I poured every ounce of my pain, my anger, and my defiant spirit into my work. I became a filmmaker. My first projects were small, gritty short films I shot on a shoestring budget with a crew of other artistic outcasts I'd met. We became each other's family. This new family didn't care what I wore. They cared about my vision, my ideas, my ability to tell a story. They saw the leather jacket not as a flaw, but as a signature. My past trauma became my artistic fuel. My pain became my palette. Slowly, painstakingly, I built a career. A short film I made won a small festival. An agent saw it and signed me. I got funding for another, bigger project. I worked relentlessly, driven by a need to prove not to my family, but to myself, that the person they threw away was worth something. Then came the big one. A feature film I wrote and directed, a deeply personal story about a young woman struggling to break free from the suffocating expectations of her picture-perfect family. It was a story I knew in my bones. I poured 10 years of loneliness and silent resolve into every frame. The film, against all odds, became a critical success. It was raw, it was honest, and it resonated with people. And then the impossible happened. It was nominated for a series of major awards and invited to premiere at the most prestigious film festival in the country. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope, my name printed in elegant script. I was not just invited, I was to be honored. The festival was hosting a special gala in my name, celebrating my work as a breakout director. The Disowned daughter was now the guest of honor. I stared at the invitation, a dizzying wave of vindication washing over me. This was it. The culmination of a decade of silent, grinding work. A public validation so loud it would surely echo all the way back to the quiet, suburban street I had been cast out from. Then, my eyes scanned further down the invitation, to the list of festival patrons and sponsors. My blood ran cold. The lead sponsor of the festival, and the chair of the entire opening night gala, was the Catherine and Robert Evans Charitable Foundation. My parents. I hadn't known. I had been so disconnected from their world for 10 years, I had no idea they had ascended to this level of social prominence. They had used my father's wealth to buy themselves a new identity, philanthropists, patrons of the arts. The arts. The very world they had always dismissed as my silly, impractical hobby. The world they had punished me for wanting to be a part of. They hadn't just entered it, they had bought a leadership position in it. I went online, my hands shaking. There were photos everywhere. My mother, Catherine, cutting ribbons at museum openings. My father standing beside her, smiling blandly. They were the city's new cultural royalty. And my mother was the queen. The discovery was a punch to the gut. The red carpet I was about to step onto wasn't neutral ground. It was her stage. The gala where I was being honored was her party. She was the one who would be giving the opening speech, welcoming the artists. She had curated a new brand for herself, the sophisticated patron of the arts. She had no idea that the festival's main event, the breakout artist they were celebrating, was the hideous embarrassment she had thrown out of her house a decade ago. The irony was so profound, so staggering, it was almost comical. My mother had kicked me out for refusing to be a part of her perfect picture. Now, I was about to become the main exhibit in her gallery, whether she liked it or not. The shock of the discovery didn't last long. It was quickly replaced by a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in 10 years, a slow, cold, and exquisitely patient sense of rage. This wasn't just irony. This was a reckoning, delivered by fate itself. My first instinct was to back out, to protect my hard-won peace from the inevitable collision with my past. But the girl who was thrown out of her home a decade ago was not the woman who was now the guest of honor. I would not run. My revenge would not be a phone call or a letter. It would not be a confrontation in a quiet room. My revenge would be public, it would be televised, and it would be silent. It would be my very presence. My existence was going to be her humiliation. The war between us began with an outfit, and that is where it would end. I immediately contacted a designer I admired, an avant-garde artist known for her bold, unconventional work, exactly the kind of fashion my mother would call theatrical and tasteless. I flew to her studio and we sat down together. I didn't just tell her I needed a dress for a gala. I told her the whole story. The anniversary party. The pearls. The ultimatum. The jacket. She listened intently, her eyes flashing with understanding. "So," she said when I was finished, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. "We are not designing a dress. We are designing a closing argument." The collaboration was a work of art in itself. We chose the finest, most supple black leather, the kind that draped like heavy silk. The design was a masterpiece of couture, an elegant, floor-length gown that was both a tribute to and a high-fashion evolution of my old, worn-out jacket. It was my history, my pain, and my triumph, all woven into a single piece of clothing. In the weeks leading up to the festival, I imagined my mother's preparations. She would be agonizing over her own gown, a safe, expensive choice from a brand-name designer. She would be practicing her speech about the importance of supporting the arts, a speech full of empty platitudes. I knew she had seen the program. She must have seen my name, Eva Evans. But in her mind, her Eva was a failure, a ghost from the past. She would never connect the difficult daughter she'd disowned with the celebrated filmmaker being honored at her prestigious event. The cognitive dissonance would be too great for her to overcome. She was the chair of the gala, the queen of the ball. She believed she was in complete control of the narrative, just as she had been at her anniversary party 10 years ago. She had no idea the main attraction was a ghost she thought she had successfully buried. The night of the festival arrived, a cool, clear evening buzzing with energy. As I got ready in my hotel suite, there was a sense of sacred ceremony to it. My hair and makeup were flawless, my jewelry minimal and sharp. Then, I slipped into the leather gown. It fit like a second skin. It was armor. It was a statement. It was everything she had tried to extinguish, now made beautiful, powerful, and undeniable. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the heartbroken girl who stood on a curb in the dark. I saw a woman who had built a life on her own terms, out of the ashes of a family who didn't want her. My revenge wasn't about what I was going to say to her. It was about what my success, my presence, and my very appearance would say for me. I was ready for my close-up. I was ready for the red carpet. I was ready to walk into my mother's perfect party and become the one thing she could never manage, control, or ignore. The limousine door opened to a wall of flashing lights and a roar of voices. For a moment, I was just a girl in a car, my heart pounding. Then I remembered the woman I had become. I took a deep breath, stepped out onto the red carpet, and entered the storm. My gown was an immediate sensation. The photographers, used to a sea of predictable silk and chiffon, surged forward. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks. "Who is she?" I heard someone shout. "Who designed that dress?" I didn't smile. I just walked, my expression calm and serene, letting the dress speak for me. At the far end of the carpet, by the grand entrance to the theater, stood the receiving line. And at its head, basking in the glow of the lights, was my mother. She was in her element, the queen of the gala, shaking hands with senators and socialites, her smile a dazzling, practiced thing. She could see the commotion I was causing, the way the press line was parting for me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, likely irritation that some unknown starlet was stealing her thunder on her big night. She hadn't seen my face yet. Step by step, I closed the distance between us. 10 years of pain and silence compressed into a 50-foot walk on a plush red carpet. The reporters fell silent as I approached the receiving line, sensing a moment was about to happen. I finally reached her. She turned from greeting a city councilman, her perfect hostess smile already in place, ready to bestow it upon the next guest. And then she saw me. Her smile froze on her lips, a brittle, cracking thing. For a split second, there was only confusion in her eyes. She was looking at a confident, celebrated artist. And then her eyes dropped to my dress, to the impossible, undeniable sheen of the black leather. And she knew. Her face, so carefully composed, completely fell apart. The blood drained from it, leaving her looking pale and old under the harsh lights. The woman who had built her life on projecting a perfect image was now living her worst nightmare, a public unmasking. Her mouth opened, and the same words from a decade ago came out, but this time they were a choked, horrified whisper. "Eva. What are you wearing?" It was the same question, but the power dynamic had been inverted completely. 10 years ago, it was a command. Now, it was a desperate, powerless plea. She was asking why I would do this to her. I didn't have to answer. A journalist stepped forward, a microphone in her hand. "Catherine, what a night! And to have the guest of honor, the brilliant Eva Evans, be your own daughter. You must be the proudest mother in the world." My mother was trapped. The cameras were on her. The world was watching. She looked at me, her eyes screaming a silent rage, but her mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile. "Yes," she managed to choke out. So proud. My mother disowned me for my identity. A decade later, she had to stand on a red carpet and pretend she invented it. That was my victory. It was not in screaming or fighting. It was in forcing her to publicly endorse the very thing she had privately tried to destroy. I gave her a cool, polite nod, the same kind one gives a stranger. Then, I turned from her frozen, horrified face and walked past her, through the grand doors of the theater, and into the light. I was reborn. Not as a reflection in her mirror, but as the work of art she could never have conceived of, and could now only watch from a distance.